happen to be my favorite color. And that's what caused the trees to be so glorious. It's the fire of the sun. Anyway, I have to head to Montego Bay, back to the Republic shortly. And as I begin, not in any mean-spirited way, as I begin, I can't help but reflect on two things in the past month. One on February 26th, which was the local government elections. And I'm not here to debate who won or not, because I think the bigger issue and greater concern for me is the trend that we continue to see in the reduced participation in the democratic process of a majority of Jamaicans. And the last 2 weeks haven't helped to change the mindset of the people as they have been looking on and witnessing in this place, in the House, certain activities that they could characterize as arrogant and some form of bullying and majority using one's strength. But as we thump desks and make our own excited responses to what we believe are great announcements, we have to pay attention and probably listen to what people have to say in terms of their lived experience. And if we are not careful, we will miss all the signals. But for those who care enough, we will recognize that the Jamaican people are indeed on a path where they are seeking change. And whilst some might snicker, change could be considered in so many different forms. And as outlined by the leader of opposition recently, change we can look at as how we communicate, not just with each other, but with the public. How honest and open we are in what we say and what we do. How accessible programs are or how inclusive they might be. What new approaches that we choose to take by responding to the needs of the people. The matter of good governance and how we engage and empower. I believe all well-thinking Jamaicans will agree and must agree as we show respect to each other that the change that they seek is something that we must respond to. Today, as I rise, I will just make two general observations on the appropriations bill, or the contents thereof, in addition to some assessments of the area to do with tourism, just to make some comparisons. And whilst I know and recognize that it's a money bill, I only will raise the issues for the government to consider and pay some form of attention to. At least hear me out. The opposition has identified growth in clusters of emerging industries, and we see them as priorities to pay attention to. Investment, trade, and global logistics, science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, the cultural and creative industries, and sport. The environment and ecological heritage and tourism are also dependent on and concerned with the nation's digitalization efforts. In this era of convergence, all these integrated areas now impact the sustainable development and growth of the other. This government has not demonstrated, in our view, its seriousness about the development of these sectors. They have been practically disinvested in some years. And in the past 8 years, there have been no clear development plan that recognizes these linkages and convergences. As part of our planning process, the leader of the opposition has committed to prioritizing the participatory development of a comprehensive policy and legislative framework and master plan that provides the necessary support and incentives for these linkages to thrive, to address investment and financing, education and training, and infrastructure development for cultural and creative practitioners, as well as address issues regarding the status of the artist and ensuring the protection and promotion of the diversity of Jamaica's cultural expressions. Those were just some general comments that were based on the presentation that was made by the leader of opposition in his contribution to the debate a week a week ago. If I look at tourism, according to what has been presented in the estimates of expenditure, tourism is anticipated this year, this financial year that's closing, to earn somewhere over, according to this document, over $4 billion for the country. From this earning, I expect to see, and the good thing with tourism is that what has been tracking over the years, using the very similar statistics and calculations, the growth in tourism is basically an industry that grows year on year, no matter what. And it requires us to be honest and, like we said before, as part of change, honest in our assessments, and we'll give credit where credit is due. But for those who are directly and sometimes indirectly affected by the industry, with that massive $4 billion, which in Jamaican dollars is how many million? Damien, you're the maths brain. Anyway, quite a bit. The question has to be asked, how are people who are in the industry being impacted by this growth? And when we look, for example, at an area that is, I mentioned in my State of the Nation address last October, my colleague, Senator Morris, earlier today, and to some extent, Senator Crawford, made mention of housing. I made mention last year the importance of paying attention to what is needed by the industry and those who work in it. Because some may say that we have a shortage in labor, but I have to question or ask whether it is a shortage of labor in a particular area. So we know tourism is centered around the North Coast, Ocherius or St. Anne through to Westmoreland. And the question has to be asked, is it that there are no workers and that is giving cry for people in some quarters to say import labor? Or is it that they're elsewhere and need to be relocated? And if they're to be relocated, one of the biggest issues that is facing that relocation decision is housing. And I've heard the Prime Minister made mention of social housing. That's not what is needed. That is required, yes, and that addresses a particular need. And we've already spoken about the number of social housing solutions per year, which cannot match or meet the needs of the tourism workers. It has been announced that there are new hotels coming on in Trelawney, in St. James, in Westmoreland. And if we look at a 1-to-1 ratio, it means that we need thousands of workers. So or St. Thomas. So the social housing cannot resolve that problem. We have to identify and invest in a meaningful way, housing for tourism workers. So I am asking or suggesting to the government that we give greater attention to housing for tourism workers. And I don't mean, I know the Minister of Tourism made mention some time ago that the new development in Spot Valley called Edmund Ridge. I don't know. Coincidentally, Edmund Ridge was supposed to have been built for tourism workers. But I also know that the starting rate right now for some homes that some people have bought and already are selling or buying into is like $18 million. So I don't know which tourism workers, because we have to find housing solutions that are less than $18 million for it to be affordable for that housekeeper or that bartender in the industry who is in need of housing. So while we announce social housing, which is important, I want to hear and see more of the investment in real housing solution to address that need. And we have to be looking at high-density solution, whether it is in places like Anchovy or Dumfries or Goodwill, wherever, because these areas are close enough to the tourism areas and have enough land. We don't have to all go into inner city communities, although the redevelopment of inner city communities is important. But we have to, and when we're building houses, let us not continue down the path where it is just a matter of building houses. We have to build communities, because people do not thrive in just houses. One of the main reasons, if many of you will have the opportunity, as I have had, in speaking to some of the people who choose to migrate, the big reason that they're migrating is that they can't see how they're going to own a house. A lot of them. So if we are interested in holding on to the Jamaican people, whether youth or not so young, and ensuring that they see a future in Jamaica and have hope in Jamaica's future, we have to be deliberate about how we invest in housing, because they want to feel good, they want to feel like they're moving in life. And while training and development is important, they will continue, as I believe someone made mention earlier, I think it was Senator Gale, that electrician who was trained at heart, but now is working with Royal Caribbean. We've technically lost him or her. We've lost him. And we have to find ways, as we train them, to ensure that we have ways in which we will retain them, one of which is decent housing. So that is my hope for the future of housing development and solutions for our Jamaican workers. The other thing that I would like to point out from a policy standpoint, and Minister Morris Dixon, with your emphasis on training and development, and I look through the heart listing of training areas, and I'm relieved to hear that there is a move to not define the training opportunities to particular regions, because that has failed. But to ensure also along that line, especially in tourism, where, yes, I know theoretically some of the baking and the sous chef and all those trainings, some of them, the basics can be found in a heart. When you're dealing with partners or investors coming from countries that have different standards of the delivery of certain of those areas of service, the partnership in terms of the training partnership with that entity is a more crucial way of delivering the service and the training that is needed. Otherwise, we have a gap in terms of what's produced as the end trained student and what is needed. And until we fix that, you're going to hear that we don't have enough labor. So I don't subscribe to this business that there's not enough labor in Jamaica. I believe if we address those 2 areas, or 3 areas in fact, the training to make sure that it is relevant and fit for purpose, housing so we can relocate people, and I did propose it and I hear that it's being contemplated. It would be nice when it's done that I actually get the credit. Not that I'm in it for just credit, but just not to be contemptuous. But I had proposed that we consider for housing solution, like the model at UWI, it's almost like a temporary housing facility to help, like a dormitory, so that when you relocate people from, not St. Thomas, but maybe St. Catherine to St. James, that they have housing for at least 3 years, that then they can assimilate into the community and transition and make room for somebody else. And then the third thing that we have to address, so that we, and because all of this is called retention of labor too, you know. So you're trying to fill the gap and also retain those who you train. It is about now how they are paid. The reality is that within tourism, there are still too many low paying, because we have to transition from low pay and deal with that issue, because people will continue to migrate because they believe that they have a greater chance of earning to buy that house elsewhere than in Jamaica. A future Jamaica, Mr. President, is dependent on hope. If the people are not hopeful in a future, they will not continue to invest. And as leaders in this country, our job is to provide that hope so that they can find reason to believe in a Jamaica and that their dreams can be realized in Jamaica. Real hope, not imagine. So, since we're here to discuss the appropriations bill, and the reality, you know, I won't take long. I just want to make some comparisons. No, I have to head to the Republic. I'm taking the bypass. So I, Mr. President, decided that, you know, I've participated in the formulation of budgets before, having worked in the Ministry of Tourism. And after a while, the words and the numbers all seem like one. And we know time flies, and before you know it, you're in a budget period again. Is the new glass? No, I didn't change it. The other one is in the bag. My backup. But sometimes, if you're not careful, you just put numbers down. And I'm not saying it's intentional, but numbers can just be put down, and we need to just scrutinize things a little bit more sometimes. So I took the liberty of looking at what was put forward last year and this year. And you know what had instigated this? When I was watching the Standing Finance Committee, because I try to watch everything that goes on in the Parliament, you know, because I have to keep myself informed, I have to be educated. Never know when I might end up there. Some people find it funny, but I'm just saying you just never know. You just never know.
I just relying on what you told us at another place, you know.
You just never know. So listen now. When I was watching the Standing Finance Committee, the Minister of Tourism was asked a question. I don't remember the exact question, but it was about the divestment of Milk River, Bath. And the answer that I got, I said, but hold on, that sounds familiar. Sounds like I'd heard that answer already, that it was in the final stages and discussions were being had. And I look back and I realized that the same thing was said last year about the year before. So for the last 3 years, it's at the same place. But sometimes these things take time, so maybe that's why. But it caused me now to look back at the budget itself and try to understand something. So I just have, I think it's either 3 or 4 questions I have. So and again, I know this is a money bill, right? But I just want to bring our attention to it. So for the past, so last year, the marketing, this is the money for Jamaica Tourist Board, was $3.5 billion, right? That was what was approved. And this year, it has moved in terms of the estimates for this year is at $4.05 billion. And that's a lot of money for advertising, for marketing, and that covers the compensation and utilities and everything, covers everything, right? But our product in Jamaica, tourism product, could be considered a mature product in a number of areas. And the way in which you invest in advertising and marketing compared to product development, sometimes you have to revisit your ratio. Sometimes you're at a stage of early development of a product, and so you have to invest heavily, and you have to market heavily, and then after a time you can change your strategy. If we are growing our industry, we have to consider how we are growing the product, because it can't remain as you are. And when I say product, not just hotel rooms, I'm talking attractions, how we grow the entertainment options, and all these things that help to make up the experience of visiting Jamaica. In product development, on the other hand, last year, product development was $1.2 billion. And this year, it's projected at the same $1.2 billion. No, I'm not saying don't advertise, don't market and all of that, but I wonder how are we seriously looking at product development? Things change, people change, desires, needs of the market change. We need to see sometimes a refreshed product. New introductions. I can't tell the last time I heard of a new investment in an attraction. I've heard about new investments, big announcements for hotels and hotel rooms. But when people come to Jamaica, we have to find ways, more new, innovative ways for them to be engaged so that they spend more money, so more money is retained. Because right now in Jamaica, we're retaining on the dollar somewhere in the region of 40 cents. We need to be getting to 60 cents. But if we're not finding new things, we have to invest in ensuring that we have products that cause people to spend money in Jamaica. And I don't mean just craft. You know, I'm talking more to cause people to spend. When you go places, when you go on vacation, you want to spend your money, you feel compelled. When people come to Jamaica, we must make them feel compelled to spend. And I am suggesting that we have to look back at the ratio of advertising versus product development, because our product is mature and it needs some refreshing. I won't even get into maintenance, because that's one of Jamaica's biggest weaknesses. We have great ideas, great things are launched and open, and they look nice and shiny and pretty. And then 2 years later, you wonder where the money went. So, and that's a part of what I see here with the product development or destination assurance as it is put here. I would suggest that it is time, whether it's under rehabilitation and maintenance or product development, we have to revisit the ratio. If I had more time, I would ask some more specific questions, but it really don't make any difference. But one other thing that I wanted to point out too is, 1 second here. The leader, I keep saying almost every time I slip and I say Prime Minister, but I meant to say the leader of the opposition spoke about the importance of us looking at community tourism. And there was a time, and Senator Crawford, you were in the ministry at the time, and over the years there have been many starts and stops with this focus on community tourism. And bless her soul, Diana McIntyre Pike, who has been championing community tourism, along with Hensel down in Treasure Beach. Outside of those 2 or a handful of people, as a policy, as a government policy, we have not focused sufficient attention on community tourism, which is where we can really cause for more of the connection between the industry and the Jamaicans, so that it doesn't feel so separate, like tourism is over there and we're over here. As close as it is, you can see it, but there's a separation. So I would like to see us, as we, maybe in the next budget, review how we invest the $13 billion that is being allocated to the tourism ministry, and see whether we can try and do things differently. Because why not? If we are in the business of building a nation, and not just the narrative as I steal from you, if we're in the business of building a nation, we have to be willing sometimes to go outside of what we consider to be comfortable and usual. Because every year when you look at these budgets, they look almost the same. And if we are going to be transformational and really cause Jamaicans, the ordinary Jamaican who is in the industry, to feel like, one, they're a part of it, and two, they have a future in it, and three, that their families can be better off because of it, then we have to look to do things differently with how we have been doing it over the years. I am not here to take away anybody's glory. I'm simply saying, let us contemplate doing it in a different way so that we can change the mindset of Jamaicans, where they look at tourism not as an extractive industry, but one that they can invest in because it invests in them. Mr. President, it's very rare that I feel like I've spoken only for 5 minutes, but I suspect with the slew of others I know who will be called upon to add. Oh, well, you know, my colleague here, she has a way of reminding me about some things that are crucial. And just before I get to the summary, because I saw where Senator Webby was excited at the fact that I was closing. But are doing well? What I would also suggest, you know, it's funny, in what was proposed in the budget, I believe the Minister of Finance had made mention of about $11 billion or thereabout for the construction of 4 hospitals, right? Bill refurbished, call it what you mean. 4. But 11 billion, 4. And then we have 1. That is still 1 and currently at 22 billion. I speak of Cornwall Regional Hospital. Now, whatever the reason, it started at 2 billion.
So the 11
4, and right. So you do the math. What I would say is that an industry like tourism, and I know sometimes when we speak of things that are uncomfortable, but you see, because we're in the business of honesty and making sure that as much as it might hurt, sometimes we just have to face the truth. The people of Western Jamaica.
Speaker's time has expired.
That's right. And she needs to speak about this uncomfortable thing. Yes, you pushing her. Yes, I am.
As you say, the responses will come. Mr. President, the Speaker's time having expired, might it be extended to permit her to complete her presentation?
The question is that the Speaker's time be extended. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. Senator
Thank
Allen.
you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, Leader of Government Business, and my colleagues. So I was saying, it matters not what has caused us to be here. We're here. And the reality is that the people of Western Jamaica, and I'm just talking about the citizens of Western Jamaica, have been without this hospital for too long. And I am grateful that we have not had any major incident in that area that could impact so severely not just the people of Western Jamaica, but visitors to Western Jamaica. And it is my hope that whatever the delays, whatever they may be and why they may be, that sooner rather than later, that we come to a conclusion with Cornwall Regional Hospital. And that it is also my hope that the announced 11 billion for those 4 other hospitals of whatever category, that they don't suffer the same fate as Cornwall Regional in terms of a ballooning of the budget. At the end of the day, we are the ones paying for it, and it is important that we understand at every point, at every critical juncture, exactly why we are here. Because we have to be open with our citizens. I think we owe it to them, and they are saying that they want to hear more and understand the why things happen or they don't happen. We can't take our people for granted. We have to respect the fact that these citizens, they put us here. We might not be elected in this house, but constitutionally we have a responsibility, a duty to carry out what we're here to carry out with integrity, with honesty, and with decency. So my colleagues, Mr. President, I close by saying that this is an important year. A year that started with an election at the local level that somebody won. It's quite fortuitous somewhere in Orange. But we're in a year where I think, if nothing else that has come out of the last month, we can learn that our people, they send us messages every day that we need to listen to and pay attention to. And we owe it to them because that's our jobs as servants of the people. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Senator Matthew Samuda, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will do my best to shorten the presentation where possible. I rise in this Honorable Senate to make my contribution to the budget debate as Senator and Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. As has been stated by colleagues, our Prime Minister delivered the most comprehensive contribution to the budget debate, certainly in my lifetime. It articulated clearly that the government has developed the capacity to practically care for its people, not with the platitudes of those who claim to have loved the poor, but have made more persons poor, but with a suite of government interventions to alleviate the impacts of inflation, break intergenerational poverty, and to complete the building and construction of the foundation for growth for Jamaica. Mr. President, just yesterday, the Minister of Finance and Public Service closed the debates in the other place. He clearly showed that this government is caring for Jamaica through a fiscally responsible budget. He also laid bare the hypocrisy of the current opposition, their past incompetence, and the fallacy and perhaps lunacy of several of their proposals. Mr. President, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation is home to much of the capital budget. The MEGJC is responsible for the portfolio areas of water, wastewater, works, ports, economic development, housing, urban renewal, environment, climate change, land, and physical planning, and are reflective of the Government of Jamaica's medium-term strategic priorities of inclusive, sustainable economic growth and job creation and macroeconomic stability and fiscal sustainability. However, as the ministry is named, Mr. President, so too is its mandate, a mandate which has been achieved despite the naysayers when the ministry was put together. This is evidenced by the 10 recent straight quarters of economic growth, the full economic recovery post-COVID, and the lowest unemployment rate in our history of 4.2% currently, and the record-breaking deployment of capital projects. Mr. President, the portfolio areas of the MEGJC are strategically aligned to the Vision 2030 National Development Plan with a focus on National Goal number 3. Jamaica's economy is prosperous, and National Goal number 4, which Jamaica has a healthy natural environment. And as the most honorable Prime Minister has said previously, economic development cannot be on the back of environmental degradation, and prosperity cannot be steeped in pollution. Mr. President, the MEGJC has received a total budgetary allocation of approximately $34 billion, and the Ministry's recurrent budget for 24-25 financial year being approximately 13. This amount consists of $12.439 billion to be funded from the consolidated fund and $743 million to be funded by appropriations in aid. It represents a 4.9% decrease in allocation for the 24-25 fiscal year. However, as we have several projects which are nearing the completion of the PIAB process, we expect to receive increases in totality by the end of the fiscal year in our capital budget. The MEGJC is the key implementer of capital projects, Mr. President. So whether it is for housing, whether it is for roads, whether it is for water, whether it is for port and logistics projects, we implement the building of Jamaica's capital infrastructure. I won't go through all the projects that the Prime Minister would have highlighted generally, but I will give some focus to the areas under my direct supervision. Firstly, Mr. President, climate change is simply not a passing fad or something we can simply wish away. It is the global challenge of the century, and as the rate of climate change speeds up and its impacts become more catastrophic, though no nation will be spared, it is the global south which will both bear the worst of the impacts and bear them first. To make matters worse, it is the developing world that is least able to decarbonize or to afford to decarbonize, and the worst capacity to adapt to the changing climate. Addressing this issue has been the focus, certainly, Madam Leader, of the multilateral systems of the UN since 1995 with COP1, which was held in Germany. This process has given birth to major international agreements such as the Kyoto Protocol and certainly the Paris Accord. However, Mr. President, it is important for us to understand and for us to explain to our citizens, Senator Fraser Binns, that though there is the buzzword of, or the buzz phrase of 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 degree temperature raise, which is what the Paris Accord seeks to achieve, is a bit of an equal sharing of misery. It is not an ideal situation, and it requires significant investment in climate adaptation if we're to survive and manage at 1.5 degrees temperature rise. Ultimately, the IPCC, which is the body that measures our changes in climate, has said that the world has already warmed 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And we're already seeing the impact of that through catastrophic storms, which have ravaged our brothers and sisters in the Eastern Caribbean and certainly in the Bahamas over the past few years. But it is, Mr. President, the slow onset events that Jamaica has experienced over much of the last decade that are sometimes overlooked. Mr. President, 70% of Jamaica's population live within 5 kilometers of the sea, usually in low-lying areas, making the issue of climate change a clear and present danger. But what does this mean with rising sea levels? Ultimately, we are already seeing saltwater intrusion into our wells, we're seeing deteriorating soil quality, and we're seeing reduced pollination rates because of heat records. Mr. President, this is a clear and present danger to Jamaica's stability and Jamaica's future. Now, what has it done already? We should be familiar in this House, certainly because I would have made several statements during the period of the impact on prolonged and fiercer and drier droughts. Between October 2022 and March 2023, Jamaica experienced its driest cumulative 6-month period in our history. At the extreme end in February of last year, we had rainfall which amounted to 8% of our 30-year average in the corporate area. Not 8% below, but 8% of the 30-year average in your driest month, just to make the point. So we're already seeing the impact of severe climate change. Mr. President, this is why Jamaica has engaged the IMF with the Resilience and Sustainability Fund, not to be confused with a bailout, and it is why we have also ensured that we have a line of credit for particular climatic shocks. The total value of these two facilities is in excess of $1.9 billion US. It is also why Jamaica this year, as the Minister of Finance has stated, will renew its catastrophe bond. It is why Jamaica continues to to engage with all multilateral partners in a manner that facilitates increased access to climate finance. Mr. President, the global community has an established structure for how it makes climate finance available to developing countries. And through our varying appearances at climate change conferences, and certainly through the footprint and the hard work of the men and women at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jamaica continues to lobby for developing countries to have greater access and for there to be reform. However, Jamaica is simultaneously using the existing structures to enable access to finance for the decarbonization of our economy and to facilitate adaptation to the changes already being experienced. I'm happy to report, Mr. President, that the Development Bank of Jamaica is now an accredited entity of the Green Climate Fund for projects under $250 million US, the largest regionally. This paves the way for more innovative financial solutions and for project access to be launched later this year. More to come. The DBJ joins JCIF as an additional access point to funds through the GCF. This year's priorities, as I condense the presentation, will simply be to ensure Jamaica submits its updated NDCs, being its nationally determined contributions. The last time around, which is a requirement under the Paris Agreement, Jamaica was 11th in the world. We seek to better that this time around. We are going to continue with our projects, rather of our development of our bankable climate change projects, to ensure that we access the climate finance which is indeed available to us. We will also continue our implementation of our long-term strategy for emission reduction and resilience development. We also aim to complete our national adaptation plan. And most importantly, Mr. President, as I get into the capital spend for water, roads, etc., we will also work on mainstreaming the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool, which looks at infrastructure risk through the climatic lens within the public investment appraisal branch processes to mainstream climatic assessments as a part of our investment assessment process. This will be the first for the developing world, and we have been lauded for it by many of our international partners because it acknowledges where we are. The other primary focus will be a frank assessment, and we will make a statement about this in the coming months, about what is required for us to engage internationally and what is the structural reform that needs to be in place for us to respond locally to what we're seeing with climate change. Mr. President, the area of water is at significant risk because of climate change. And I will highlight just some, not the 1 hour of projects that I could list out related to water in this presentation. I had written, Madam Leader, and you'll note, that even on the critical section of water, the Prime Minister had to cut his presentation, and I had written, I have no such intention, but apparently I was mistaken. I tell you. Mr. President, it is impatient of debate, and certainly you have experienced this yourself, that Jamaica has
420.
Mr. President, noting the time of the evening, might the standing orders be suspended to permit the Senate to sit beyond 4:30 to complete its business?
Question has been put. Those in favor? Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Leader. It is impatient of debate that Jamaica has underinvested in its water systems. Much of our infrastructure for potable water, sewage, and indeed infrastructure is either beyond aged, or rather is aged beyond its useful life, or inadequate to serve communities which have grown beyond the design capacity. This would apply, obviously, to all of our water systems. Your government, however, has been investing at an unprecedented rate in these systems to reverse the decades of neglect and poor management. I will outline today the details of planned capital expenditure for the fiscal year and indeed update the Senate on several ongoing projects. Mr. President, I think it is important, however, to update and address two areas that I believe are suffering disproportionately at the moment. Specifically, these are Brownstown in St. Ann and indeed the Negril corridor spanning both Hanover and Westmoreland. Mr. President, in recent months, the people of Brownstown have had a rough time with the supply of water because of particular issues which discontinued supplies from the existing Minard wells. Mr. President, I'm happy to update the Senate that operations were restored at the Minard facility on Sunday, March 24th. This facility currently supplies an approximately 20,000 residents and businesses in the Brownstown environs. And though it is still only running at 60%, we're happy to have it back online as we have been trucking exclusively in this area for the last 2 months. Mr. President, this will help the areas of Brownstown, Huntley, Liberty Valley, York Castle, Stanfast, Goshen, the Minard Hill, Orange Hill, and Benin. But Mr. President, we are not relying solely on this old well. This is yet another system which has outlived its useful life and continues to be unreliable. It is why, Mr. President, that the Most Honorable Prime Minister instructed that a new well be constructed. Mr. President, I'm happy to update the Senate that in March 2024, the contractor commenced the drilling of a new well at the site to provide a viable alternative to the water supply issues being caused by frequent interruptions at the existing Minard well, which had become significantly degraded. As at Monday, March 25th, the work has progressed beyond a depth of 496 feet, and the NWC is hopeful that the drilling to the depth of 800 feet next month will be complete at the end of next month. The overall timeline, Mr. President, for completion is 6 months. That is a bit of a under-promise and over-deliver because we've built in some time, but we expect to significantly improve the water supply for the citizens of Brownstown and its environs on the back of a $60 million investment, Mr. President. Mr. President, we understand the impact of water scarcity in Negril and its environs, and we've seen particular videos going around, and we've also heard the cries of citizens there. I myself, and I know certainly Minister Bartlett, have been there for several meetings and for several consultations to explain the issues to stakeholders. We empathize with citizens and businesses who are hurting from reduced water supply. However, this area, which is supplied by extracting water from 2 watersheds, both are currently experiencing drought conditions. This is exacerbated by infrastructural inadequacies and failure leading to a high level of non-revenue water. From 1 month into Jamaica's normally longest dry season from December to April, several water supply systems in Hanover and Westmoreland began to see below normal inflows of water at their source. That is, since January 2024, we have experienced drought conditions at these locations. Colleagues looking at the screen will see which systems are impacted and what the impact, and rather what the sphere of impact have been. Now, this data is actually dated by 7 days, and with the fact that you've had no rain in these areas, I would expect that these numbers would even be lower as it is today. Given the severe impact of the water shortage now affecting these several water supply systems, a comprehensive water supply response has been initiated. These include maintenance and operation interventions to ensure maximum abstraction and reliability from existing supplies at facilities. These include procurement and delivery related to the Logwood site and a new standby generator being used in that area. Public consultation has also been underway through community groups so that consumers do not waste the limited water supply that we have. We have also done extensive trucking to the worst areas from as far as Landilo to as close to the plant as Green Island. This, Mr. President, however, is an emergency response. And however, it is important that there is a major program, a major overhaul which will start this year. These measures include fast tracking of plans for the new Roaring River water treatment plant to add 10 million gallons daily more water to the network. This will be at the cost of approximately US $20 million. Fast tracking of plans for the expansion of the Great River Negril treatment plant by an additional 5 million gallons, expanding the capacity to 20 million gallons daily, and replacement and upgrading of the Lucy Negril area pipelines at an approximate cost of $35 million US dollars. This project is already going through the budget process, and we expect to start later this year, Mr. President. Now, I also, while I'm speaking, bring your attention to the screen which shows the North Coast Water Improvement Scheme, because I want colleagues to understand, yourself to understand, Mr. President, that yes, you will have problems from time to time, but I want to assure citizens that we have analyzed the water supply around every section of the country, but because of the chronic issues that late last year when you had the breakage of the line, for instance, Mr. President, going into St. James, or now that you have the particular issue going into Negril, I want to assure citizens that we have the designs in place. We're going through the varying project development phases that will see significant increases in capacity at water treatment plants. We'll see increases in community storage. You will see the tanks mapped where they are, certainly where there need to be increases, whether it is at Appleton Hall or the Terminal Reservoir, Mr. President, or whether it is at the Hartford Tank in Westmoreland, or whether it is the Flint River Reservoir in Hanover. We can explain to residents for every inch of the North Coast where their water systems are, what is it that they require. But, Mr. President, I want to bring their attention to the fact that the Roaring River Negril Water Improvement Project will see the construction of a new 10 million gallon water treatment plant in Westmoreland at an estimated cost of US $20 million. We're going through the final PIAB stages, Mr. President. And the good thing about fiscal responsibility is that what it has done is that you have projects competing for cash. And I know that the water team is indeed going through the process rapidly and expects to come first. The overall effectiveness of this intervention has to be supported by significant upgrades of community distribution systems. And that is why the government has fast-tracked proprietary procurement efforts to get to market with its national NRW effort, which will no doubt benefit the entire country, but not least of all this area. For ease of viewing, if you look, that kind of zooms in a little bit more on the western end of the country. It also shows you where the particular tanks and water treatment plants will indeed be. The next slide shows you the Great River Treatment Facility, which will be upgraded as mentioned. I'm happy to report, Mr. President, that these projects are underway. We have heard the issues. These issues didn't happen overnight, but we are the ones that have ensured we have the capacity to react, Mr. President. It is in that vein, Mr. President, that I'm happy to report that the National Water Commission, which was once considered a fiscal risk, will for the second year in a row declare a surplus at the end of March 2024, Mr. President. Mr. President, this surplus should be thought of as a growing water investment capacity instead of just simply as profit. The sound fiscal management of the NWC has led to several major capital investments being completed over the last 24 months. These projects have improved connectivity and reliability in our water distribution network, resulting in improvements for over 350,000 Jamaicans, Mr. President. For the benefit of colleagues and for those listening, the list of major projects that have been undertaken and completed at a cost of $2.6 billion include, and I will not read the list despite my threats so to do earlier, include projects in every corner of this country. Now, indeed, now, Mr. President, these projects, the first slide will show you projects completed, not underway, not in procurement, projects completed over the last 24 months, major capital investments. The ones in green are the ones that I would not have had the opportunity to have a lovely commissioning ceremony for the pictures, but they are complete and the citizens appreciate them. They're complete.
Wow,
The ones in the yellow star are the ones where we have had commissioning exercises.
good job.
Well, South Manchester will benefit at a particular phase in the Greater Mandeville water improvement product. There are several mains that are to come off of the line that is about there. The next slide, Mr. President, shows just this particular last financial year and shows where we would have done significant work. Mr. President, but that's not the totality of the work that we have done over this last, certainly this financial year that is coming to a close and the two previous. It is important to note that we have also completed a significant number of rural water interventions, and someone will notice that there are some interventions in South Manchester there, despite having a lack of source water in that space. So you will see that we continue to do the work, Mr. President, and the work is being seen. It is speaking for itself, but it is benefiting the people of Jamaica. Last year, Mr. President, in the midst of Jamaica's worst drought, and I'd mentioned this earlier, the shortfall in the corporate area's water need was 12 million gallons daily. Now, one should know, and this is the interesting fact, is that if we call it pre-NRW, as at 2015, the corporate area used to require 55 million gallons daily. After the work done by this government and by the National Water Commission, as at last year, the corporate area requires 38 million gallons daily because we have cut the leaks significantly, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, this is why we have pursued with such vigor the development of the long-touted Rio Cobra water treatment plant in Content, St. Catherine. This project, Mr. President, will supply, when complete, 15.5 million gallons daily, supporting distribution in the KSA, Portmore, and Spanish Town. This US $78 million PPP will move us closer to our 2030 goals of water resilience. Mr. President, we will continue to make major investments in capital works in the coming fiscal year of over $5 billion is expected to benefit an additional 165,000 Jamaicans. Additionally, Mr. President, more than $2.5 billion will be invested in sewage infrastructure. Mr. President, just to show you the scale of work being undertaken by this administration, by the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and by the National Water Commission, I bring your attention to another map. This shows projects which are ongoing in the yellow pins, which are construction is underway, and projects that are at varying stages of the procurement process, right across the length and breadth of this country, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is not up for debate that this government is better for the water sector than any previous government. But what will our capital program this year look like? Well, Mr. President, because I did not read what we have done last year, I will read what we will do this year and what is underway, Mr. President. Well, this year we will invest 160 million Jamaican dollars to benefit, and I'm sorry Senator Floyd Morris is not here, to benefit the people of Central and Southeast St. Mary, developing the Jordan Run Well number 3, which will connect into the water system from Highgate and go right into Southeast as well. We will also be investing in the Black River Town Centre to Arlington Parity Line for $238 million. We will complete the Barron Hill Reservoir replacement for $20 million. We will also do the initial distribution work in Rock River, Clarendon, Mr. President, ahead of the new dam being built at a cost of some $75 million, Mr. President. We will also be working on storage tanks and installation at the cost of $194 million in places like Hope, Mount Airy, Louisville, Happy Grove, and Whitehall. The Hermitage Dam Rehabilitation Works, which is a consultancy services. And I pause just to acknowledge this one, Mr. President. We should be aware that the Hermitage Dam is approximately 95 years old. It was built with a 50-year warranty. There have been initial assessments that show that there is need for structural reinforcement, as well as there is a possibility for significant expansion. So we will do that engineering work this year to get to market as soon as possible. We will also, Mr. President, be investing in the Jericho wells in Yuatan, and the Yuatan to York Street pipeline, $98 million. We'll be in St. Thomas doing Springfield to Seaforth, Morant Bay upgrading works, $250 million for the people of St. Thomas, Mr. President. We are in progress in completing the last section of the mains replacement in Port Royal. The reason the number is only $3 million, Mr. President, is because the work will be finished the week after the new financial year starts, Mr. President. So Port Royal in East Kingston would have benefited from hundreds of millions of dollars invested by this government, Mr. President. We will also this year, Senator Bunting, invest $210 million into South Manchester, Grovetown to Cross Keys mains replacement, Mr. President. We are also investing in Wakefield, Trelawney, $20 million. We are doing the Bogwell to Wilton Crossing in St. Elizabeth, $290 million, Mr. President. We are in Christiana Spalding investing in 2 mains to the tune of $53 million, Mr. President. We are investing in a transmission line from Moravia Access Bridge reconstruction that needs to be covered to ensure that communities aren't cut off there, Mr. President, for $70 million. We are also doing the Constant Spring Water Treatment Plant, Ramshorn Tunnel, raw water intake, which will improve supply again in Kingston and St. Andrew for an additional $50 million, Mr. President. We expect, Mr. President, for those who live in West Rural St. Andrew to break ground this calendar year on $190 million of works in Essex Hall, something promised 50 years ago, Mr. President. We will also complete the work that is underway to bring the main line that comes from Hermitage over Jacks Hill to the tune of $315 million. That line was some 60 years old, so it is a major replacement, Mr. President. We're also doing Juno Crescent transmission mains. We're doing Magati to Newton, Mr. President, for $95 million. Senator Hill, I'm surprised you're not clapping for that one. We're doing Mount Royal. We're doing Rhine Park in St. James at a cost of $145 million. We're completing work in Rosemount, Camelot, and Discovery Bay in St. Anne, Mr. President, to the tune of $120 million. We're doing the water lines in Santa Cruz. We're completing our work, Whitehall to Newmarket in St. Elizabeth, for $158 million, colleagues. Subtotal there is $3.19 billion. Let me make sure I haven't skipped or haven't missed anything, because we're not short of projects. $3.19 billion on that subtotal, Mr. President. Now, the Greater Mandeville Water Supply Improvement Program. Mr. President, we expect to invest a further 770 million Jamaican dollars this year in the Greater Mandeville Water Supply Improvement Program. Mr. President, tank replacements in places like Windsor Castle, Portland, in Farmtown, St. Anne, in Barnstaple, Trinidad, in Mount Olive, in St. Andrew, will get $342 million this year, Mr. President, and is well advanced in procurement. We expect to be at the Infrastructure Committee in weeks.
The Speaker's time has expired.
The Speaker's time having expired, I'm proposing that he be given sufficient time to complete his presentation.
The question has been put. Those in favor? Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Minister Samuda, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. The major potable water transmission main improvement program, Mr. President, will see some $804 million invested this year. That involves the KSA transmission mains from Ferry to Rock Pond in St. Andrew. Now, for those
that's in
who...
addition to the 3?
That's different from... Yes, this is different work. This is different work. Now, for anyone who has lived in Red Hills, has a friend in Red Hills, has cousins in Red Hills, or visits Red Hills from time to time, think of this pipeline as serving everything from the foot of Red Hills to Cooper's Hill. This area has had poor water supply for my entire lifetime, and we will break ground in a matter of months to fix that issue once and for all, Mr. President. We're also upgrading the Montgomery Corner to National Heroes Circle, Mr. President, because we have completed the well work there that will provide an additional 2 million gallons to service everything from KPH to Vineyard Town, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are also completing this year the upgrading of the Helsham Main Road mains, Mr. President, an additional $50 million there. And of course, for those of you who drive on the North Coast, you'll see the work taking place from Roaring River to Runaway Bay already. $100 million is being invested in that pipe laying exercise there, Mr. President. Now on my list, you will see a gap, and I made sure to leave it there for those of us from Western Jamaica. This is the Lucid in the Grill line. We will start that this year, but it has to complete the PIAB project phase to have the funds assigned to it in September, Mr. President. But that also goes from Martha Brae into Montego Bay. We will start this year, Mr. President. Mr. President, there is also the Regional Non-Revenue Water Reduction Program. This simply targets leaking pipes. So in areas such as Vernon's Drive in Montego Bay, we will invest $76 million this year, Mr. President. When one looks at our rural water supply program, I will get into that in a bit. We are making sure that I'm on the same slide. As I get into sewerage, Mr. President, well, just not to, I know people are listening out for their projects. So before I get on to sewerage, we also intend to upgrade this year, Mr. President, Cane and Adelphi. Their water supply will get an investment of 200 million Jamaican dollars, Mr. President, and I don't want them to be wondering where it is. But, Mr. President, the biggest environmental issue we face is actually not solid waste, as painful as it is to see our solid waste issues. It is actually how we manage our wastewater and sewage. And, Mr. President, we will be investing this year in our general sewerage program in Greater Portmore, in Harbour View, and in the rehabilitation of wastewater treatment plants in particular areas, some $1.13 billion, Mr. President. Not sexy, but necessary work to be done. In the Kingston and St. Andrews sewerage program, we will invest between Mona Heights, University Crescent Sewer, Monroe to Wellington Hope Road, the Port Royal sewerage, and the land development sewers, 1.46 billion Jamaican dollars this year, Mr. President. Mr. President, outside of this massive capital works program, let me mention a few other strategic projects, because some of them have languished for a long time, and the Prime Minister's instructions to me in January 2022 when I started was simply to unblock these pipes. Madam Speaker, the CDB, well, Mr. President, the CDB funded projects, it is practice for another place. It is practice for another place. I was just making sure you're all following. There are projects which have been announced for some 20 years. And we have explored different funding mechanisms, including using a loan facility from the Caribbean Development Bank, which will see some $30 million being borrowed, with the government funding some $6 million. I'm happy to report that the credit committee of the CDB has finally approved the project, and we have established in this coming financial year the project unit at a cost of some $85 million, which will do the procurement throughout the course of this year. These projects have languished for over 20 years. This is Aguata Vale in St. Mary. This is the Mason Hall scheme in Western St. Mary. This is the Albert Town and Ulster Springs scheme in Southern Trelawney. This is the Union Balaclava scheme in Northeast St. Elizabeth. This is Port Morant Airy Castle in Eastern St. Thomas. This is the Green Park Higginstown Bamboo scheme in Southeast and Northwestern St. Anne. Mr. President, these projects have been promised by every administration for the duration of my lifetime, and we will be the ones to get it started and give these people reliable potable water. The other one I want to point point out, because it is particularly important. It is in an area called Rock River in north central Clarendon. This area requires significant significant investment. And it is why this year we will put in distribution pipelines that will benefit in excess of 6,000 residents to the tune of $140 million. But this work will be done in parallel, Mr. President, while the final designs for a dam are actually completed, so that as the work is being completed on the distribution network, the work on the storage from that dam will commence, Mr. President. So though there is a source on site, we will be building a dam right after, Mr. President. So I want to assure, sorry? Well, I moved to another slide. Those are just the slides of the tables to make it easier to follow the numbers that I cover. So I'll be at rural water in a second. Mr. President, we have made this commitment to the people of Clarendon, and I want to assure them that the work starts this year, Mr. President. Beyond that, the other strategic focus has to be energy in the water sector. Mr. President, we cannot become fiscally stable at the National Water Commission or fiscally stable at the National Irrigation Commission with the energy bills that we have. We have had months where our energy bill is $1 billion Jamaican dollars out of $3 billion collected. Just for round numbers, just so persons understand where we are. And it's not 1 month, not 2. I wouldn't say it's every month, but it's certainly something that happens. Well, Kingston and St. Andrews subsidizes the water for Manchester. The revenue of Manchester couldn't pay the energy cost. That's just the reality, which is why you have a standard rate nationally, because some regions wouldn't be able to afford it. But Mr. President, we're not going to sit back and allow this to continue as is. It is why this year we will spend $68 million at the Forest Hill Relief Station to put in a 350 kilowatt solar generation facility at the foot of Red Hills, Mr. President. It is why this year we will develop a 350 kilowatt solar generation facility at Leaders Avenue at the terminal pumping station in Montego Bay, Mr. President. It is why in Fraser's Content in St. Catherine, we will construct a 100 kilowatt solar generation facility at a $55 million cost, Mr. President. It is why we are moving to complete the last of the planning work and move into the implementation phase within the first quarter of this financial year of the announced PPP, $62 million PPP floating solar project for the Mona Reservoir. That will produce 45 megawatts of energy, and we expect that to give the Water Commission in excess of $1 billion in benefit annually, Mr. President. We're not sitting back and allowing the energy situation to remain as is. Mr. President, the Prime Minister has further directed that 4 renewable energy projects be developed to achieve this in the upcoming financial year. This is a renewable project for the Constant Spring Water Treatment Plant, for the Martha Bray Treatment Plant, for the Great River Treatment Plant, and for Logwood in Hanover. These projects will have a major impact, and we expect all of these to be complete before the end of 2026, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, people just want access to water. It is why rural water is so incredibly important to us. And I wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing in this area. And on your screen, you will see some projects that we expect to be completed by June of this year, which would have been announced previously. And this is why, the reason we list it is so that people understand that we're not playing politics with water. We are working in every corner and crevice of this country to ensure people have access to potable water. Mr. President, by June of this year, I will have the opportunity to commission the New Eden system to benefit 655 people in Western Portland at a cost of $10 million. We will complete the mother floor system in northeastern Manchester, benefiting 2,500 people at a cost of $15 million. We'll complete the Bunkers Hill system in northern Clarendon, benefiting 1,000 persons at $10 million. And if you look at the list, Thickets in St. Anne, Brandon Hill in northern Clarendon, Free Hill in northwestern St. Anne, and Mile Gully's solar plant to facilitate their pump will also be complete, Mr. President. We expect these to be complete by June, and this is an investment of $95 million. Some of these are carryover. But, Mr. President, I also want to speak to the capital program of assigned projects. These are ready to start, Mr. President. These have gone through the procurement process, so I soon get into the additional allocations that the Prime Minister has made. But these ones we can say to citizens, look out for us with construction in your area and pardon our progress, Mr. President. I speak of the Riversdale project, the first leg of it in northeast St. Catherine, $53 million, Mr. President. Spring Gardens in southern St. James, $19 million, Mr. President. Maroon Town will get an investment of $53 million. Stepney in southwest St. Anne will get an investment of $45.6 million, both in pumping and distribution infrastructure. Rocky Point in its unplanned settlement will get $22.8 million of distribution line. Petersfield and Fallen Spring in western St. Mary will get $11 and $7 million respectively. Bamboo in eastern Hanover will see an investment of $30.4 million. Orange Bay in western Portland, Cascade also in western Portland, $60 and $19 million respectively. None such in eastern Portland for $26 million. The Low River in southern Trelawney, $20.3 million. And of course some pipes to support some work for $40 million. Now I want to pause to make a point, Mr. President. In the worst of our drought, Mr. President, we started the process for these to become a reality. What I want to assure citizens is that we hear them when they are frustrated, but the work does take some time. So now some of these areas are not experiencing the worst of the drought, but the work has already been done, and this will build in the water resilience for them going forward, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, I want to move to the next point. The Prime Minister. Yes, there's more water. Mr. President, Rural Water Supply Limited, which in many ways functions as a bit of an engineering corps, has developed over $2 billion of projects that have just been waiting for funding. Now, Senator Allen made the point that when you're out in the field and you have elections and you have engagement with citizens, they send signals. We've heard the signal that water is one of their biggest issues and where they want the government to prioritize. It is why the Prime Minister last week announced an additional $1 billion Jamaican dollars allocated for rural water systems, Mr. President. Now, we will announce the list of projects that will make up this $1 billion in the coming weeks. But I want to assure the public that we have more projects than we had funding for in the past. So these will not be projects that do not happen this fiscal year. Most of them will be projects that have supplies locally that do not run the risk of going over into the future, but it will indeed benefit thousands and thousands of Jamaicans. Mr. President, I want to add a reminder, and I won't speak long to this, just to note that we did table the rainwater harvesting guidelines last year as an augmenting structure to our water needs in the country. We are midway in a pilot project that is seeing 3,000 rainwater harvesting systems being installed in 14 constituencies. So 214 beneficiaries per constituency who have all gone through social assessments to assess their need, Mr. President. And I want to be clear that not everyone that was submitted met the social assessment. So we're seeing a very rigorous system applied to ensure that persons who get these tanks are those who need them. And we do, just for persons' awareness, we install the bases and the tank and the guttering for these citizens. These are citizens in need. They're in need both because of financial wherewithal and also because of the fact that they live outside of the utility footprint. But I want to bring your attention also to the big yellow book. It speaks to the fact that the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation has some $250 million for additional black tanks this fiscal year. We expect to distribute some 10,000 tanks to citizens in need across all 63 constituencies, Mr. President. But just to mention briefly 5 national projects which also continue to be developed, but so that citizens don't feel that they've fallen off the radar. Firstly is the critical supply mains in western Jamaica, Mr. President. This $70 million project is expected to start later this year, will take some 24 months. That is the Martha Bray into St. James, and the Negril supply lines at approximately $70 million US. The Hermitage Dam, as mentioned earlier, I won't go too much into that, as well as similarly the Mona Reservoir was built for a much smaller population, and as such, we're going through the planning process for its expansion. The completion of the project assessment phases for the development of the Mahogany Vale system, and indeed the assessment of the health of the Yallas pipeline, which is critical to Kingston and St. Andrew. And finally, the assessment phase of the use of deep sea desalination in Jamaica is expected to be completed this year to see how viable it is or isn't. The nation will be kept abreast of these advances on these critical national projects. But Mr. President, our farmers cannot be left out. That is the critical linkage to tourism, if we're really going to hold that sort of value. So as Senator Allen would have spoken about, but the big piece that has been missing has been irrigation, Mr. President. It is why this year, we're in the implementation phase with these things, Mr. President. We're not making announcements. Some of these have been on the cards for too long. We're midway in the Essex Valley irrigation scheme, Mr. President. This year, 1.9 billion Jamaican dollars will be invested in this system. We expect the totality of the project to be completed in 2 years. The Southern Plains irrigation system benefiting Parnassus, Clarendon, and Amity Hall and Bridgepen in St. Catherine, another $1.5 billion this year, Mr. President. And Mr. President, this one irks me. The Pedro Plains irrigation project is underway. We are in the middle of the cadastral mapping, and we're in the middle of the engineering scoping of the project. We will break ground in practical construction this year, Mr. President. One of the outputs of the project, Mr. President, will see 1,000 farmers in St. Elizabeth getting titles this year, Mr. President. Now, why does this project irk me? Well, because it was announced in a community called New Building in St. Elizabeth by Michael Manley in 1973, and here I am speaking about it in 2024, Mr. President. But this government is getting it done, Mr. President. It is impatient of debate that no other government has done more to reduce water scarcity, improve resilience, and widen connectivity. I wish to assure Jamaicans that we are cognizant, clear on the impact on your lives, and we will redouble and triple our efforts to make sure Jamaica is indeed water resilient. Mr. President, I will not dive into the environment section of my presentation. I will mention 2 areas which I think are critical so that there is no ambiguity in the society on these matters. The first, Mr. President, is, I hope you've noted that we tabled 2 new policies today under the environment policy. Yes. So, you know, I just want to make sure everybody sees it, right? The protected areas green paper, and I look forward to Senator Fraser Binns' critique and comments on that one. I'm sure there'll be matters to discuss on that particular issue, as well as Jamaica's new watersheds policy, which is a very good segue coming out of the water discussion. Well, Mr. President, as an element of the triple planetary crisis, which I will not discuss today because the Prime Minister would have spoken to it at length, one of the things Jamaica is doing is ensuring that it deals with the issue of plastics pollution seriously. Mr. President, in 2019 and 2020, Jamaica led the region with the first phases of a ban on specific types of single-use plastics. Jamaica is happy with the progress of the International Negotiating Committee to develop a global plastic treaty. We are, however, working to ensure that when this treaty is finalized, Jamaica is well ahead of the targets and requirements. As such, allow me to reiterate the announced suite of measures that will be taken in the coming financial year. Mr. President, Senator Fraser Binns, Jamaica will complete its national policy on the environmental sound management of single-use plastics. We will begin, Mr. President, to separate waste, in particular plastic waste, at all government facilities nationally. Jamaica will also enter phase 4 of the ban on some plastic materials on June 1 of this year. This phase will include a ban on the manufacture and import of and distribution of single-use plastic lunchboxes and on personal care products that use microplastics. And the question is always, well, what are we doing about plastic bottles? It is the elephant in the room. Well, prior to the pandemic, Mr. President, Jamaica recycled approximately 7% of the plastic bottles produced on a monthly basis. Mr. President, I'm happy to report that Jamaica is now in excess of 30% on a monthly basis of the plastic bottles being produced, being recycled each month. Now, we have a lot of work to do. That's not good enough. But the global target is 70% by jurisdiction. And that is what we expect. We don't know whether that will be the final term in the plastics treaty that is being developed. But we expect to be in the range of 70% of all plastics being produced in Jamaica being recycled through the use of this deposit refund mechanism, Mr. President. And the government is working closely with the National Solid Waste Management Authority and, of course, the recycling partners of Jamaica, and I want to commend them for their leadership in this area. Mr. President, the second to last area I will mention is just very simply that the fines under the NRCA Act have been the source, and Wildlife Protection Act have been the source of much consternation for a long period of time. The current fines under the NRCA Act ceiling is $50,000 and $1.5 million under the Wildlife Protection Act, Mr. President. When we table the amendments which are coming, that will move to $5 million for individuals for both pieces of legislation and $10 million for corporate bodies, Mr. President, this year, putting in appropriate penalties for polluters in this country, Mr. President. Mr. President, the final issue I will mention before, well, I do have some time, but the final issue I will mention, Mr. President, is that of beach access. I wish to report and reiterate the Prime Minister's announcement that the beach access and management policy is indeed complete after years and years of going around. The policy seeks to ensure Jamaica's beaches are preserved and sustainably managed for present and future generations, and provision is made for access of Jamaicans and visitors alike. Mr. President, interestingly, it's the first policy and legislation that actually defines what a beach is in Jamaica, Mr. President, but more to come in that area. But beach access cannot simply be a document that is tabled here that we debate. It has to be practical, and people deserve good beaches, and it is why we are happy to announce that this year, Mr. President, this year, that 9 beaches will be upgraded in addition to 1 major beach park. These include the Winston Taylor Park, Hanover Beach, free for the Jamaican people. The Success Beach in St. James, free for the Jamaican people. The Rio Nuevo St. Mary Beach, free for the Jamaican people. The Murdoch Beach in St. Mary, free for the Jamaican people. Winifred Beach in Portland, and also the Boston Beach for the Jamaican people. Rocky Point in St. Thomas, Guts River in Manchester, Crane Road, Alligator Pond in St. Elizabeth. These beaches will be upgraded with funding from the TEF to ensure that Jamaicans have access to some of the best beaches in this country, free, Mr. President. Now, there will be a ministerial statement on this because it is a very detailed policy and one that will have to be interrogated. But I also, as them say, passing Christian them pick me first, in this case I'll mention mine last. The Prairie Beach Park, Mr. President, will be developed as the fantasy beach park, free for the citizens of Jamaica and visitors alike this year, Mr. President. A beach park that will mirror what we've tried to achieve with the Harmony Beach Park in St. James, creating genuine access to high-quality beaches for our people, Mr. President. Now, I watched the news yesterday evening, and I was called about a protest which I was admittedly quite confused about, related to Little Duns River in St. Ann and its partial closure. And there is a matter in court, so I'll be very careful in what I say about the matter. The beach was not closed because of a commercial development, because of any commercial interest in the property, or to keep Jamaicans from accessing it. It was closed because there was attempted gang capture of the facility, and a Jamaican lost their life at the end of 2022. A Jamaican was murdered by gangs who sought to take control of the commercial activities of that beach. The nature of it, for those who have attended upon it, would know it is a difficult space to secure because of the geography associated with it. The beach was also severely degraded in terms of the facilities that supported it. Now, our procurement rules for all of the critique are what they are. Our design phase takes what it takes. And we've been working with the police, the private sector in the space, the UDC, and indeed all stakeholders to ensure that when the beach is finally reopened totally for all 7 days a week, it is reopened at a standard that the people deserve. With quality sanitation, with safe steps and railings, with proper facilities, and proper vending stations for the vendors to ply their trade. But Mr. President, the other element that must be in place is around safety. We will be building in safety capacity and an operating space for the police, and we will ensure also that lifeguards have proper vantage points from which to operate. Mr. President, we're not going to be bullied into giving or putting people into an unsafe space that is substandard for Jamaican citizens. But we do view it as an important access point, which is why we have published warnings that those who wish to access it on a Saturday and Sunday, where we are able to provide security on those 2 days, can do so, but with a clear understanding that there will be construction that is ongoing at that point. So we preserve the access point to the sea for those who wish to bathe in that area, but with the clear understanding that upgrades are indeed underway. We're in the design phase, and we will enter the procurement phase very soon. But Mr. President, the safety of Jamaicans will always be paramount for this administration, Mr. President. But I want to assure the residents, not just of St. Ann, but the residents and the citizens nationally, that Little Duns River belongs to them. They have access to it now. They will have greater access to it when the work is complete. But that access will be safe, it will be high quality, and they will all be invited to enjoy it at their leisure. Mr. President, the other major beach park that we are working through the development, or rather 2 major beach parks that we're working through the development phase of, and I think it's important that citizens are aware, is indeed a major beach park in the Grill, which will make sure that our citizens have the access and the benefit of the beauty of the world-famous 7 Mile Strip. We're working through that right now. We're also working on a major beach park in Portland in the area of the Boston Beach Park currently. Mr. President, beach access isn't just a document, even though we've completed the document. And we'll debate it, and we'll go through it, and we'll take line by line. Beach access requires investment, and this government is making the investment to ensure all Jamaicans have access to their beaches. Safe access, responsible access, and access in a way that benefits Jamaica. And Mr. President, we will not resile from the fact that we are making those investments. Mr. President, I had intended to respond to a number of matters that have been raised this morning. And I'm available if colleagues feel so that they're worthy. I'm just going to make a point of 2. There's no increase in taxation. Taxation rates have been reduced in many categories. It is increased economic activity that have caused the increase in tax revenue. So if you have more people working, whether it is on PAYE taxes or increased consumption, it happens. You have more people driving to work, meaning more gas collections. You have increased hotel rooms. You have increased flights coming into Jamaica. You have increased company registrations, Mr. President. In every category of the Jamaican economy, you have increased output over the last 8 years, and you have a more efficient tax-based system. It is time the opposition stops this nonsense. They know better. It insults the intelligence of Jamaicans, and it is time it ends, Mr. President. It is nonsense. Mr. President, we could go on and on and on. I can dive into housing if you're so minded. Mr. President, I have a lot to say because we've done more work than you guys ever have. But Mr. President, ultimately, I want to assure citizens that this government is doing the work. It is using the tax revenue in a circumspect manner. It is ensuring that their quality of life is indeed improved. and it's ensuring that we fight the threats and that we're prepared for headwinds that do indeed come, such as inflation, such as drought, because we're building in the resilience and indeed we're ensuring that Jamaica is indeed prosperous, productive, and peaceful. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Wow. Thank you, Minister Samuda. Sorry, Senator Bunting. Hold a second. Senator Bunting. Yes. All right. Thank you, Senator Bunting. All right. Minister. Minister Hill.
Mr. President, thank you. Clearly, Mr. President, we've had a very good and interesting debate about the appropriations bill, which I'm going to ask that we pass shortly. But I must say that the first thing I want to talk about is the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability. And for that, I should probably get out my device, because what I see in the discussion today is a twisting around of trying to get points to make that are clearly not valid. The budget, Senator Morris raised it, that is Dr. Morris. The budget for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability for 24-25 stands at 248.245 million, a reduction of 9.9 million from its allocation during 23-24. But this reduction, Mr. President, is available for everybody to see. This is the reason why. The reduction is due to the fact that the JCPD was no longer renting their former premises as they had completed their removal to their new headquarters. The allocation for fiscal 23-24, therefore, had included rental for two premises, the former and the current. Now, that's not, we have the Yellow Book, and Dr. Morris loves to tell us how he does research.
Sorry, let me hear the point of order.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. In defense of Senator Flores.
No, the point of order.
I'm going to raise it, sir. If you
No,
give me a
tell
chance.
me first of all, what point of order are you referring to? It relates to this. No, man.
You have to state it.
No. I want you to tell me which aspect of the standing order you're referring to. To make the point of order.
Minister Hill is
What
stating
section?
something incorrectly about
What
Senator Morris.
section?
Do recall that Senator Morris said he hadn't have a chance to check. He was told he did not check, and he says he's putting out there to make sure that it is looked at.
Senator Fraser Beans, that's not a point of order. Continue, please.
My point is that, yes, I heard that, and I hear what you say, but if you're, my point in my response is if you're going to take on an issue and you can check and the data is available, it can be checked. That, Mr. President, is my point. No, I'm not unfair. I'm not unfair.
Senator Hill, it's not a point of order. Can you continue, please?
No. Then I look at President, Mr. President, Dr. Morris raised the issue of Karachi and Operation Pride. I had no intention of going down this road. But when you look at Operation Pride was infected by a malignant metastasized cancer of corruption. I don't know why that was even mentioned. People lost their money and their land. Dr. Carl Blight had to resign as minister. it was brought into being by Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, and that was just one of a whole length of other scandals. So we're just going to leave that alone and say, just leave Operation Pride and don't bring that up. But look at what we're doing with housing. And then I look at the twisting and turning that is done by others, including my good friend, Senator Crawford. Mr. President, I am just simply amazed because I know he knows better. I know he knows math. I know that when you have that kind of return in government revenues, taxes have not been raised for 7 years, you must know it's because of the growth in the economy, of new activities coming in place where people will pay. It's not because we're gerrymandering anything. Just accept the fact that the economy has been well managed by the government. Dr. Clark took you guys around the block. I mean, I thought you would even mention that. And you mentioned it. The government is performing well. Taxes are coming in beyond our expectations. We're happy for it. Why don't you just join us and be happy? Okay. It will be called in due course. In due course. And you know, remain friends. Senator, yeah, man, she gets upset sometimes, but we have to move on. The tourism and housing. Tourism and housing, you can be personal, then tell him not to raise it. Tourism and housing, Senator Allen made a good point. She made a good point in that we know that we have to have additional housing for people in the tourism business. But as early as November 2022, the Prime Minister was opening on a hotel for 136 million investment in Jamaica. And that private sector company had committed to make 1,000 houses that they will sell to hotel workers at good prices. But the government is also expecting other private sector builders. And I know Minister Ed Bartlett, we talk about it all the time. As people are coming in, we're saying, this is what you have to do if you're coming into Jamaica. You have to consider, there's a line item in your expenditure that you have to consider to build houses for tourism workers. And also the government is recognizing that where we have land near tourism areas, we have to make sure we make arrangements that housing in the vicinity of not the 18 million that was mentioned. I agree that can't work. But in the vicinity of 12 to 14 million will be made available. And I know the Prime Minister and Matthew and others are working with the NHT to make that possible. So we're looking at that to make sure we provide housing. Not enough workers. The PM stood right here and said, somebody across there, I think it may have been member Julian Robinson, or somebody on that side mentioned that, look, we shouldn't be importing workers. And he said, I agree with you. He said, we are going to look using HEART and all the other training institutions we have, find every single Jamaican, train them if they need training, upskill them if they need upskilling, to make sure we provide the workforce that we need. Now, the estimates are that there are 700,000 people who are not in the workforce. Let's say half of that are elderly and people who are below working age and so on. But maybe 250, 300,000 are available that could be trained and upskilled. The Heart Trust and other training institutions will be doing that. But I have been pressing business. Every speech I make across the country, the business group, I make it clear that they must train as well. When I ran NCB, I made sure I got people, went to the Vice Chancellor at the university, and I said, I want the best 25 students. I don't care if they studied physics or they studied scripture. I just want the mind. We will train them. We spent a year of our money training them. They didn't work in the bank. And that's how big businesses and some smaller ones have to train. We have to get that message out that we have not trained enough and we must train a lot more. And, you know, many of our business people have responded well. Grace trains. I know Wysinco trains. I know Jamaica Brothers. I know probably even Proven trains. If you don't train, you're not going to have the people. So I'm very happy. I'm excited, Senator Fraser-Prince, to have business people training, because the government alone cannot do it and must not do it. Because while we'll send out university students that have basic information, when you go to Proven to work, Proven has to train you to do Proven's work. NCB has to train you to do NCB's work. So private businesses must do it as well. So when we all, luckily, why we're doing this is 4.2 unemployment level means that we have the lowest unemployment in our history. But it means on the other side, the corollary side, is that we have the highest number of Jamaicans ever employed in the history of this country. That's why we have to be talking about upskilling and training, and maybe even in some cases looking outside for labor. But here we are. We're in Jamaica and we can get it done. In the case of what Minister Samuda said, all I can say about this, Mr. President, is rivers of money for water and sewage. That's all I can think of. 3.1 billion here, 1 billion for rural water, another 800,000 and so on and so forth. Billions of dollars that will be spent in the next year. As soon he and I are on the what they call it now, not PIMSEC, PIAB. PIAB committed to make sure we look at projects. When those are passed and they come to the infrastructure committee, where he and I sit as well, and Minister Morris Dixon, we will get them through as fast as possible. We want to make sure the procurement is done properly, but speedily, because if the money is not spent, what's the point? So, Mr. President, much of that has been procuring already, but you have to keep the support. You wouldn't bother with the procurement business, but you just leave that alone, because exactly right. Don't go. That's a little bit like Operation Sprite. Don't worry, touch that. So what we're saying is, we're at the place in our development, Mr. President, where Jamaicans are expecting the government to deliver. The government is committed to deliver. The government has delivered substantially. And the appropriations bill, which is before us, has all the expenditure, has all the arrangements to handle the money. And therefore, after all this, and the really substantial submissions by my side, and some other submissions from the other side, I'm going to ask Mr. President that the bill be read for a second time, if it pleases you.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2025 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament, read a second time.
Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clauses 1, 2, and 3. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. I put this schedule. Sections 2 and 3. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments.
Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read a third time.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum Out of the Consolidated Fund to the Service of the Year ending on the 31st day of March 2025 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament, read a third time and passed.
Madam Leader.
Mr. President, it has been a long day. It has been a productive day. Debate has been robust. I think if there is one point, and I must say that I had quite a presentation to make, which I know my friend in the orange tie would have enjoyed, because it went through the multidimensional factors of development and the SDGs and connected the budget to everything. It would have been the stuff of great bonding. But but as leader, you have to allow the team to present. I just have one point that I would wish to make, and that is in light of a comment that was made, I think, by more than one member on the other side, and sotto voce and on the feet, and that it was about truth being uncomfortable. I just want to make the point, Mr. President, that no one on this side is uncomfortable with the truth. And on that point, Mr. President, I want to not only say thank you to the staff of the Parliament for supporting us through this lengthy day. Our Hansard team, the orderlies, Mr. Marshall, the clerk, deputy assistant, the cafeteria staff downstairs, and also to wish everyone, and you, Mr. President, your families, colleagues on both sides, a peaceful and blessed Easter. A holy Easter if you are practicing, and one in which I encourage everyone to just stay safe on the roads. We know that it is also a time when some people choose to have great festivities, and that can lead to unsafe behavior on the roads. So I want to encourage everyone to be safe, be careful on the roads, and again, blessed Easter to you and your families. Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
And before I come, same to you, Madam Leader, and to everyone. I ditto your comments. The question is that the Senate do stand adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Those against? This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned.